Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. We got Andrew joining us. Unfortunately, Tyler's power is still out, so he's not going to be joining us today, but we're going to get him on at some point, and hopefully everything will work out at that point. But while I am going on about that, y'all should be doing the things like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff. Get your emails in the morning whenever we go live, which is, of course, Wednesdays for the Gold Mine, Collectives on Fridays. And if you have any thoughts, questions, comments, anything at all, by all means, put them in the comment section and we can engage those throughout the show. We are going to be talking about boundaries. But before I smash through that boundary, let's get into some intros. Andrew, give us a quick 10, 15 seconds where you come from, all that good stuff.
I am Andrew Siepka. I am the head strength and conditioning coach for the Marine Corps out in Hawaii and the owner-operator of Siepka Ludus Strength and Conditioning, which is a strength and conditioning company, but also a mentorship and speaking company as well. And I am just happy to be here with you guys again, getting to chop it up with my brothers in the North and talk a little bit about boundaries. So just happy to be here again.
Love it. Love it. When I told my wife who we had coming on, she was like, "You got somebody from Alaska and Hawaii at the same time, like the non-continental US company Canada." And I was like, that would have been perfect had we had both. But Andrew, good to have you on here, man. I'm super excited about this. Sean, how's the mountains?
Yeah, things are good out here. Andrew, recently I've noticed that you're kind of pushing a lot of weight and you've got a lot of like chains hanging off the end of your bars and looking back on some of your older stuff, I didn't notice quite as much chains dangling off. Are you into a new rhythm now where you're like all about pushing the chains or throwing on extra creative weight, or is it something new that you've brought into your program?
So the best way to describe what I'm doing with that is I'm kind of just in a different style of a strength phase. So the reason that I'm using the chains is the chains teach more stability, and then it also kind of uses what's called accommodating resistance, because if you use just straight weight on a bar, for example, think about that would be like driving a car on a nice sunny day, beautiful blue skies, weather conditions, everything's gorgeous. When you start adding chains and other materials to a bar, what that does is now we're like driving a dune buggy up a hill, right? So both are driving, but now we're learning how to operate a system in multiple different styles of environments. So when I go back to lifting with the traditional weight or a traditional barbell, all those other stimulations are gone, but everything else is locked in place. So now I can lift a little bit more stable and aggressive, because at the end of the day, strength is all about stability. And if you're not stable, you're not going to be able to lift the weight.
I really like that.
So that's generally what I thought. I'm not a big guy, but I'm not a big guy in the gym on a bench or on a rack or anything like that. And as I observed the chains, I thought, I think that's obviously, well, I said obviously, I think that is for the destability of the load. So it's creating randomness or generating chaos in the moment, for lack of a better term. And so given that, and I try to do the same thing myself when I'm pursuing the stork stance world champion position for the Olympics in 2037, which is yet to be invented. It's a new sport that I'm going to invent, the stork stance competition. And so what I'm doing is I'm trying to stand on one leg and I'm trying to stand on bizarre surfaces, really uneven surfaces. I'm trying to get up on rocks and then stand on the tip of the rock. So it's really off balancing and it's frustrating. And so it's frustrating because I know I can stand still on steady ground, even ground for much longer. But the moment that I get on these unstable surfaces, it's not that my ego takes a hit. It's a sting. It's hard to swallow the suboptimal performance when I know that I can perform easy on solid ground. But it's all part of the process. And I like to expeditiously move against my boundaries. And so standing still on the ground is easy. I'm always trying to push my boundaries to become unstable in the moment in order to learn stability. And so I was curious if that was the case. Now, my actual question is this. When you see other young fellas out there in the gym, and I've seen videos of this, where they're doing similar workout to you. They got all the chains hanging off. They got chains around their neck. They got chains around their ankles. They're Mr. Chains. Do you think that every young man out there understands the purpose of what they're doing? Or is it simply an emulation of either heroes or or
Mhm.
people that they want to be like, but they don't understand. And they're just desperately seeking some sort of visual indicator of, I'm in the game. What's your
Mhm.
thoughts?
Yeah, I am right there with you, Sean. I would say that a lot of times it's we live in a society now where what we see through our highlight reels of Instagram or whatever social media we use, we can only take certain things. So what I think is a lot of people see it, they think it looks cool, or they think it looks, like, oh, it makes me look extra tough or strong or all these other things, but they don't fully understand the intention behind it, which I stated a little bit earlier, which is that accommodating resistance, right? Because if you think about, I know in my head when I'm squatting with chains, when I stand that weight up and there's X amount that's on the bar, that's really heavy at the top. But as I go to lower that weight, that load changes because now those chains are hitting the ground. But as they hit the ground, like you said, they're going all over the place. So every rep's going to be different. So it gets lighter as I go down. But then when I go to stand up, that instability comes back in because those chains are coming back up. But now as I'm moving up through that squat, the lift's getting harder because there's more lift, there's more weight being raised as that lift is extended. Right now, I can sit here and explain that to you as far as why I'm doing it. But if you were to go up to your average gym goer and say, why are you putting the chains around you? They'd probably say, I don't know, it makes it harder, or it does this, or it does that. But if there's not intention behind what we're doing or boundaries, like the video that you're talking about, that was done on a dynamic effort lower day. So the intention behind that day, or the boundaries within that day, are to move with the intention of being violent and aggressive with the weight. Now, if my ego's involved with that and there's too much weight on the bar, I can't move with that same intention. So I've taken away the boundary of the training perimeter, right? So just like we talked before, going back to intention, making sure that we know why we're doing what we're doing, because if we're not, chances are we're not actually getting better. We're going to put ourselves in a deficit and make it worse, because the chains are there for me to address and attack weakness, because I know what those weaknesses are. Therefore, I have those boundaries. But if you don't have that and you don't have that intention, you're probably just going to end up hurting yourself because you really don't know why you're doing it in the first place.
But they look cool, bro. That's
It does, bro. It looks, and you know what's funny? That's
It does look cool.
I have a twin brother and he's a mechanic. So a lot of times I don't understand his world, but I understand the mechanics of the body and vice versa. So we'll talk like this back and forth. And when I was explaining to him one day the chains or even the bands, and I told him why, he was like, I wish now that you say it like that, that makes a lot more sense. Like, I thought you were just doing it because it looks badass. And I was like, no, man, I'm too old to be trying to look badass at this point. Like, I
You
like
are.
that you say that and it makes me feel good, but like, that's not the intention behind what I'm trying to do.
But in, here's an interesting thing for me. So in not trying to look like a badass, but in pursuing the badass path, you're effectively looking like a badass, whether you like it or not. And so it's not seeking to be a badass. It's just on the journey to becoming one. You end up maybe looking like it along the
Right.
way from time to time. So I put up a video this week, and it was me, again, standing up on a log. I've named it now the tuning fork log. And as I'm standing on there, the video is only like 45 seconds long. And I'm on one leg and I'm doing my wobbly woo, trying to get a grip on my balance. And someone rides past me on a mountain bike. And I track them, and they look over their shoulder as they've gone past me. They're now further down the trail, and they just give me one of those glances like, what is that? What is even going on? Why is that guy standing on a log on one leg in the middle of the mountains, in the middle of nowhere? I go out there to do it so that I'm not gonna be observed. I'm not doing it in the center of town so people can see what I'm doing. And so as that person rode by and over the shouldered me, I actually wrote a little bit of verbiage on my Instagram post, and it was about, man, if I could look at myself over my own shoulder, I would. And that's a sign that you're living a life that is like pushing the pace hard, or you're pushing up against the boundaries of the norm. The reason
Right.
that lady looked at me further down the trail is because she's probably never seen some random, maybe hobo out on a log trying to balance on one leg. And so I think these kind of moments are good, but it's how it's observed. And so I'm just going to give two case studies here on that same moment. Some people who saw that video thought, what is he even doing? I actually got DMs like, why are you doing that? But I also got another response, and it was from a friend of the podcast. His name is Craig Zielinski. And he took the video and he mirrored the video. So basically, he stole my video, which is
Hmm.
cool because he did awesome things with it. He stole my video and then he put his voice overlay on top of me just trying to bounce on top of this log. And what he spoke about specifically was the difference between a static approach and a dynamic equilibrium in
Hmm.
life. And the fact that we all make macro and micro adjustments in the moment that we may or may not be aware of. But it's our job to put ourselves in the position where we face these macro and micro effects throughout our life. And I thought him stealing my video, he's a cool dude, so it's all good. Him stealing my video and then throwing his own thoughts on top of it shows me that at least a percentage of the internet observes some random dude in the mountains stand on one leg and thinks deeper about it, comes up
Hmm.
with his own philosophy about it. In fact, overlays his philosophy in the video so that maybe others can learn for it. So my question to you, Andrew, is this. When you're doing your workouts, have you taken the time or a moment where you describe in greater detail perhaps your philosophy of why you do things like that?
So I do that usually goes to the Marines I get to train. The philosophy behind the warfighter and why we train the certain ways that we do and for resiliency purposes. And that usually goes to the Marines and then the individuals that I get to have the opportunity and blessing to be able to coach, because I do online coaching as well, which, you know, brings its own interesting thing. Because when I have a Marine in the weight room with me, right, I can physically touch them and move them and put them where I want them to. But then when I have someone who's online or just like this, I need to find other ways to communicate and get my point across to them, which, like you said earlier, is a way of pushing a boundary as a coach, because I can't coach physically one way and have it work the same way when I'm coaching this way. Um, so yes, I do. But I'm happy you said that, because that is something that I do plan on sharing more so on my platform in the future, as far as the intention behind how I'm training and why I'm training. Because a lot of times I do just give those snapshots, um, and I can see how they would be misinterpreted. And I've run into some stuff very similar to you, which it's like, why do you do that? Why do you do this? And, one thing I've had to learn through my own process is everything that I'm trying to do takes constant effort and self-awareness and intention. And for most people who struggle with that, they're not speaking the same language as me, so they're just not going to understand it. So I'm looking for the ones who have that self-awareness and have that ability to put that effort into, whatever it is that they're trying to do. It doesn't have to be in the weight room, right? Weight room is one form of resistance, but the three of us know resistance comes in many forms in life. And the only way to overcome resistance is to push back against it.
Or get out of the way, or
Yeah,
slide,
which is
or slip it, or do it. Like
yeah,
there's all kinds of different
some
places.
verbal judo there.
Exactly.
Yep.
This brings up an interesting thought in that, I remember back in the 80s and the 90s when, there was this image of gurus in the mountains, right? That one lone monk sitting at the top of a mountain that people would have to climb all the way up there to get, like, what is the meaning of life? And they would be like, what did you experience on the way up here? And, like those kinds of
Yeah.
mythic, cryptic kind of stuff where you would engage that. But when Sean puts those videos up of him doing his poses or kicking the sticks or anything like that, you're kind of creating a little guru moment
Hmm.
for others to go, why is that happening? Right. And perhaps that at no point in their life had they ever considered that that would be a viable option to go do, let
Yeah.
alone why would that person do it? And that,
Mhm.
I think, it's the impetus behind it, in that people now question that particular moment. And that might have been the only time they've ever questioned anything in their life. So
Yeah.
I really congratulate you guys on doing these things, because I think it's just outstanding in the fact that it forces people to question what's going on. And I think that
Mhm.
is it's a sorely needed thing nowadays, at least in my mind.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
Yeah. I
And
think my biggest mission in life is to make people feel something. Now, whatever that feeling is, that's up to you. But I think, like you said, most of us are not feeling anything nowadays, and we don't even question anything. And I mean, then we lose that level of curiosity, effort, development, growth. And that's why, for me, whether it's in the weight room or speaking engagement or anything else, my goal is to make whoever I'm speaking to feel something. And whatever that is, then to challenge them to do something about it.
I like that. Sean, you got any thoughts on this?
I do. Sorry, I was distracted for a sec. I had to pull up my phone and pull up Instagram, the actual video where I'm balancing, and I titled the video "Looking Over Your Shoulder." And so I'll just read the verbiage super quick, just so it gives some context. Maybe we can play around with it. I don't know. So, looking over your shoulder. We all do it when we see something out of the ordinary, something out of the norm. The mundane aspects of life rarely get a second look. In this short clip, I'm just doing my thing. It's not a contrived moment out in the mountains. I'm simply trying to become the stork stance world champion, which doesn't exist as an Olympic sport yet. This is just me playing the life game the way I like to play it, with curiosity and confidence that I am ... in quotation marks, frickin' in the game. Sometimes the things we do in life can raise eyebrows, have people glancing over their shoulder. Perhaps it's not a bad thing. It might be a sign that you are pushing the pace, and it might be a sign the other person just saw something that sparked a sense of curiosity in them. So that was my post. And I know that not many pick up what I'm putting down, but the people who do pick it up tend to sit and chew on it for a bit. And that's why a guy like Craig Zielinski took that post, took that moment, took that video, and put his own deeper thoughts on it. So maybe I've at one time early on in my social interactions with Craig Zielinski, maybe I had him looking over his shoulder at me. Just, who's that weird old dude? And maybe that's just enough to spark a interest in viewing the world a little bit differently. And I think that is our responsibility to some degree. However, I find the devil is in the details, and sometimes doing it right is difficult. Doing it wrong is easy. And that's why I go out in the mountains and do my thing, because I don't want to do it in my hometown, right on the town square, where everyone thinks that I'm trying to rub it up in their face. I'm trying to rub it up in my face. I'm trying to learn the lessons in solitude. And if someone rides by and sees what I'm putting down and it makes them look over their shoulder, I dig it, man. But I'm not gonna yell at them as they go by and say, "Hey, did you notice what I'm doing? Give it some thought." You know? So I don't know. I don't have much figured out. What do you guys think?
Andrew, what do you got?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest things that's been going through my head, and especially that comparison, right? Because there is a lot of times when we're doing something different, there's a comparison where automatically it turns into competition. And whether that comes from, insecurity or projection or whatever. But one thing that I always try to tell myself is I'm not trying to be better than anyone, but I'm trying to be better for everyone. The better I am for me, the better husband I am, the better friend I am, the better coach I am, the better communicator I am, the better networker I am. So I'm not trying to be better than anyone to say, look at all this stuff I do, but I'm trying to be better for everyone. So whoever I'm around, we can collaborate, we can communicate, we can get on mission, and we can do, like Sean just said, motivate. I look at us like we're kind of like, it's like we the few, the fuel, right? Because not everyone has the courage to be uncomfortable, to look like an idiot or what's assumed as an idiot, to be a beginner, right? And no one believes that you can do it until you do it. And the reason that Sean can sit here and say not yet is because he's proven that to himself time and time and time again. And he doesn't care how long it takes, because it's going to get done. And I think that we both share that philosophy. I don't care about time. I'm going to show up and continue to put in the work. And when it's meant to happen, it'll happen, and the right people will be there. And until then, it's just continue to learn, grow, and develop along the way, right? There is no destination. It's only the journey, and the journey is where all the sweet stuff comes into play. Like you said, with that old monk along the way, what did you learn on the journey, young man? Right. And it's that's where the diamonds are.
It is true. This is one of the things that I love, especially about the collective and the networking that you brought up. The fact of people being better for themselves, which then applies to everybody else.
Mhm.
And I think at the core of it comes down to the fact of, like, you got to know who you are first off, and then you got to know how you're going to show up as your best self moving forward. But I want to want to swing back onto this concept of boundaries because I think it ties into this, is that the connection between knowing yourself and showing up for yourself and setting boundaries with those around you, right? Like this is key, because Sean, to his point, he could stand up on top of the mountain, and as every time somebody rode by him, he could be like, "Hey, have you seen what I'm doing? Are you thinking about
Yeah.
it?" Right? That you're not setting any boundaries at that in any way, and you're actually invading other people's space by doing it. So how do you like, where's the line with self-care and boundaries
Mhm.
and like setting those things up? Because as you said, I think a lot of people just don't even engage it to begin with throughout their
Mhm.
lives. Andrew, you
Yeah.
got thoughts on this?
I do actually, and I'm glad you brought that up, because as all good preparated people, I have a good amount of notes for here. And after you guys told me what we were talking about, I broke down boundaries into three things: personally, professionally, and then when you're trying to achieve goals. So some of the notes I had down there personally, for me, if I'm trying to be better, how do I set my boundaries? I need to know my limits, right? Because if not, the world's going to push them. And how am I supposed to know them unless I push them myself? But that's got to be my limits emotionally, physically, and mentally, right? Because anytime in my life I've been able to physically go, but when I physically went, maybe I wasn't taking care of myself emotionally, and that was the weak link. Or maybe I was taking care of myself emotionally, mentally, but not doing what I had to do physically, and that was the weak link. So being able to assess those three areas, clearly communicating my needs. How are you supposed to know what I need if I don't tell you? Closed mouths don't get fed. So I got to be the initiator on a lot of things. And even if I don't understand, I need to let you know I don't understand, instead of having an ego and pride and being like, yep, I got it. I got it, Big Bird. I got it, Sean. No problem. And in my head, I'm like, I have no idea what's going on, but I'm too ashamed. So I'm not going to say anything, and I'm just going to fake it till I make it. Self-care, right? For me, I work out, I'm a trainer, I'm a coach. So as much as I love doing this, this is not the thing that fills me up. What fills me up is the artistic side of things: reading, writing, singing, creating, right? Painting, just trying these things that if you looked at a guy like me, you would just be like, what are you doing? Like those things that make people, like Sean said, turn and look. Because when you look at me, you just assume that I'm just going to do everything in the gym. So I like those head turning moments. Consistency. The only superpower I have in my life is I'm extremely consistent, right? That's it. I get up and I get up and I get up and I go and I go and I go. And if I fail, I get up again and I try and I try and I try until I figure it out. And then lastly, making sure I'm supported. And this was probably the biggest one for me personally: is you can have all the goals and missions in the world, but if you don't have people who are aligned with those goals and missions, you won't get there. So making sure that you're there with the right people. And part of that will pour into that professionally, and then achieving your goals, which a lot of us struggle with, is learning how to say no. Saying no to others in some instances is saying yes to yourself. And that's okay. We got to learn how to be okay with that part, because no one's going to see my goals and my desires and my dreams the way that I see them. So it's my job and my responsibility to keep that in the forefront and find people who also see that and can understand that flexibility. Because if I'm trying to solve and help everyone reach their goals, how am I ever supposed to reach my own? Right? How am I supposed to pour from an empty cup if I've given everything that I've had to everyone else and left nothing for myself?
That is a continual battle that I think we all struggle with, is
Yeah,
pouring out of our own cup, for sure. Sean,
especially when you're a giver.
oh yeah, and anybody that has a service mindset, I think, struggles
Mhm.
with this, because it is a constant battle. Sean, you got any thoughts on this?
I do. I'm gonna try not to raise my second thought because it'll be kind of controversial. So I'll try to stick to my first thought, and we'll see how I make out. So my first thought is this: when it comes to those boundaries, as Andrew laid out, the physiological, the psychological, and the emotional, getting that ratio right is kind of the key to living a good life. Now, here's where I did it wrong for a long time. I kind of think of them as three sliders: physiological, psychological, emotional. Now, think of it like a soundboard or sound equipment where you've got these three sliders. And I used to do this, put all of them to 10. But that's not how it works now
Mhm.
for me. I've had to arrange things in my mind. And this is You're not issued sliders when you're born. No one is. The sliders is kind of like a metaphor, we'll call it, but it's all controlled by the soundboard of the mind. And it kind of goes like this. Those three sliders operate on 100%. And so you can slide your physiological focus up to 40%. Now you've got 60% to play with the other two. You want to go all in on the emotional side if you want to really get in touch with yourself, 70%. Now you've got 30% to play with on the other two aspects. You don't get 10 out of 10 for all three. You only get 10 to play with your three. And what that will help you do, what that'll help you learn, is get some balance in your life. So the balance is the key to life, of course. But in order to understand your own balance, you've got to like sometimes put one of those sliders up to 10 and see how that feels. Let the other two, quote unquote, suffer to some degree while you suffer by going to a 10 on one of the others, and learn what you need to learn in that misbalanced ratio. And so as you move through life, I believe that you have to move those sliders from time to time to their max. Let the others sort of suffer in silence, as it were, to see what you can learn in that moment. And that's not like a one and done. Oh, I learned the lesson. I listened to Sean. I tried it. I tried it this afternoon. I've got it figured out. That's not how it works. It's a constant evolutionary process where year after year, or decade after decade, or perhaps more correctly, phase of life after phase of life, you have to readjust these percentages to some degree. When you think you've got it figured out, it's probably time to readjust your percentages on those sliders. So that's just a thought construct to play with. And again, it's your mind that controls those sliders. You don't get to actually push any widgets. The widget is you. My second thought will be a little controversial. I'll try to rein it in a little bit.
Let's
Just
hit
before
it.
I came into this podcast, I was quickly dealing with some things on Instagram. And this Instagram ad popped up, and it was from some guy who's representing himself as the leading expert in help for men who've come through a divorce. And I thought, I wonder what this guy's got to say. So I read his verbiage, and I thought, 10 years ago, he's got a photo of him 10 years ago, and he just looks like an overweight, balding, lackluster man who had lost his way. That's what he looked like to me. If that's judgy, I'm just simply assessing the photo that I saw. And then apparently his 10-year photo later, where he got his act together, in his own words, he looked worse. And I thought, well, the photos don't make any sense to me. Maybe his verbiage will explain something as to why he looks worse, though he's claiming that he's making improvements. And his ad was just a pitch for men to come and join his club. And his club was based around this. 10 years ago, I got divorced because of the following reasons. Now I've done a bunch of research. Now I can teach every divorced man how to be mega. And I thought, I wonder what the comments are looking like. And anyone who jumped into his comments that said, and I'll loosely phrase it as, dude, you got divorced and now you're a subject matter expert on divorce. How are you going to help me? And his almost instant response was this: always passive aggressive or defensively going on the offense. He would say words to the effect of, "What are you talking about, you loser? Man up. When you're ready to man up, come and join my club." Oh, wow, this can't be real. So I had to test the waters myself. And I put a comment in there because in his verb, he said, "When you're ready to be a man, just type ready." And so I dropped into the comments and I said, ready, ready for these dumb ads to end. And of course, he had to go all full aggro on me, which he did. And, he was going to teach me a lesson about what it means to be a man. And we went back and forth a couple of times. And I kind of hoped that maybe rather than firing his full volley at me about how unmanly I am, and when I responded back to him saying, maybe our definitions of being a man are different, he still hit me with another volley. And I thought that would have been a perfect opportunity for him to maybe understand who he's talking to rather than just talking at. Again, I crossed my fingers and hoped that maybe he would take a look at my Instagram bio, maybe be a little more respectful, maybe try to understand that I'm not just some hillbilly that fell off the back of the turnip truck. Maybe he'd be a little more respectful and enter into a conversation where both of us could gain. Nope, wrong. He just went double down, full tilt. Now I'm an idiot. Now I'm a blah, 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 whatever. And I haven't responded back to him. What's the point? But he makes a great proxy. He's a great example of this artificial individual who feels like he's pushed up against the mega boundary called divorce. Now he's a subject matter expert that the moment his water is tested, he goes on the offense and every man is an idiot and we all need to man up. And it's a terrible look for men.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, what do you do with these moments? Do you guys have tips other than just to ignore them? Or at what point and I'm not saying I'm defending all men, but at what point does a man step in and say, hang on a sec there, dude? Maybe run your program a little bit differently because it's a bad look for men right now, the way that you're running this program. Do we leave it or do we get involved?
Dang good question. Andrew, you got thoughts on it?
Yeah, you know what? I can see why you were saying at first that this could be seen as controversial and why you didn't want to bring it up, but I'm really glad you did, because there's a couple things that, stood out to me. There is, we have all been tested in varying ways, the three of us, correct? That doesn't make me better or worse than anyone else, but I've been tested in ways that have checked my resolve, that have given me confidence, not arrogance, but confidence in my abilities as a man and what I'm able to do. And with that confidence, I don't feel like I need to be the loudest person in the room or what is called the emptiest tin, right? Because we know the emptiest tin rattles the loudest. And that's something I struggle with too, because I almost see those. And then it's like, because I'm doing the opposite, I almost want to fight the valiant fight, but I don't want to die on every single sword either. So it's one of those things where it's like, I almost look at it like it's a projection, right? Because at the end of the day, Sean, you're a mirror to him to show him the areas that he's not really a man and he is insecure. And that's why he lashed out and attacked you, in my opinion. And this is just my opinion. I don't know this person, right? And maybe they're a great person. I have no idea. But based off the interaction that you, as my friend, shared with me, that sounds like insecurity. That's not someone I would really want to help me navigate a hard situation in my life, such as divorce, right? So it's like, and this is just me going off of, like you said, the information I've gathered. And yeah, maybe I'm wrong, but if I was looking for someone to help me through the hardest times of my life, just like in firefights or hard situations, I'm going to look for the person who can stay calm under fire and give clear tasking, clear direction. Hey, this is where we're at. This is what we're dealing with. Let's get through this thing. I'm here to help you, not to, the second that you challenge me, belittle you and tell you how much you don't know to make myself seem bigger. So that's a tough one,
That's
man.
how I
For
read
me, I
it,
usually
yeah.
ignore those things. I try my best to ignore them because I know sometimes people who will punch up are always looking for someone to punch down on them because it justifies. So if I recognize them those ways, I try my best to not punch down, but still very clearly and articulately lay my boundary. But it doesn't even sound like this man wants to speak the same language as you. He sounds like he just wants to ear beat you and let you know how awesome he is and how dumb you are, which there's no collaboration there.
Yeah, that's generally it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because I find that we're talking about boundaries in general, and somebody like that has none, right? They don't know how to set them. They don't know how to project themselves in a realm that actually has boundaries. They only know, and to Sean's example just prior, is that type of person is just going to tell you to push the dials up to 10.
Yeah.
That's all, the only information they're going to say is just like, keep pushing, be a man, be stronger, be blah, blah, blah. And there's some great comments here. I just want to touch on these because they're awesome.
Sorry, so my second point, I raised it hesitantly because I know it could be misheard by some others out there. Andrew, how you interpreted what I was passing along is generally in line with what I interpreted based on the limited information back and forth with that individual. But I mean, we've all been in the game long enough that you don't need a half a novel in
Yeah.
order to see where things are going. And so, especially if someone has been paying attention to social media, trying to understand its rhythm, trying to understand its actual language, the language between the lines, which I've been trying to do for the last 2 years. And so I see social media kind of for what it is at times. And this was a pretty clear example of me, or to me, that um, this individual is limited in scope and was lashing out in for lack of self-confidence. I mean, under effective enemy fire, he would not have been a calm individual.
Right.
And so however, the reason that perhaps he's got there, and this is why I raised the point, is because he hasn't faced consequences.
Mhm.
His boundaries are unlimited on social media because no one is holding him accountable for his nonsense. And I'm going to loosely term it nonsense. So without consequences, the social media footprint of some egos can be so all encompassing that they're Thor in their mind, swinging their Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, like they own it. And so, as much as I don't want to get into these drag through the dirt sort of conversations, at what point should consequences be injected into the conversation? I mean, if I just looked at it and thought, "Ah, there's another idiot," and
Right.
just didn't even blink and carried on to the next thing, that dude will never face consequences
Mhm.
in essence. So it is a interesting little puzzle to solve, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It,
I
it,
I agree. And I would say I'm glad that there's men like you who are willing to step up and correct, because that's it, especially when you're talking about men, right? Because what's the biggest thing with men? We don't talk about boundaries. We push the boundaries. Intensity, intensity, intensity. Emotions are weak. We don't talk about them. We don't do this. So, if corrections aren't made, the ripple effect of some of these things can be very detrimental, right? So this is why we're all doing the things that we're doing. So sometimes correction is necessary, and that's where I would almost use like shooter's preference, right? Like you're a smart, wise, articulate man. You've been challenged. You've had to have your ego get dissolved in all of these other things, right? So it's almost like knowing you the way that I do at this point, and knowing the things that you've been able to accomplish in your life, I would trust your discretion on a correction in this, because sometimes corrections need to happen. And if not me, then who? Because we're going to always think it's going to be the next person, but we keep passing that buck down the line. We're in the situations we're in the first place. So sometimes the buck has to stop with us, right? And for me, I know sometimes I can be very aggressive, so I have to learn how to set that boundary in a more constructive manner, because I know my default is, okay, you're not listening, I'm going to make you listen then. And that can be very destructive to my mission, which, like I said earlier, is to make people feel, to make people encourage, to bring people to the table if they're willing to work on it. So for me, that's where I also need to play with my boundary of like, okay, like, am I still being a good representation of the message that I am trying to put into this world? Or am I now, jumping into this cesspool here? Um, so in that situation, one thing I would do is I would probably message that person directly and be like, hey, brother, I'm pretty sure we got off on the wrong foot here. Like, this is what I mean. And if you want to talk about it, I'd love to talk to you. But one thing I'm not going to do is yell into the abyss back and forth at each other, because like that's not getting either one of us anywhere. And then that way, at least the ball's put in their court. And if they want to take the challenge and step up and defend what they actually believe, because all of us here know that if you come to me and you challenge me, I'm going to defend my stance, not in a way that we need to knock down, drag out, but let's have a discussion. So if the shoe was on the other foot and you came to my social media and you and I had this conversation, and, I would want to have the opportunity to defend what I am standing on, because if I believe in what I'm doing, I shouldn't have to react that way.
I think this goes into it as well, in the fact that by setting your own personal boundaries well,
Mhm.
and stating, hey, I will engage somebody like this once or twice. Give them
Mhm.
a shot. Hey, like you did, Sean. Like you engaged, said, "Hey, man, well, like, what is the point? Where is this even going?"
Mhm.
They come back at you full aggro. Okay, cool. Give them another. Okay, hey, man, like I'd love to just discuss this with you. And from there, it becomes, well, I tried. Okay, cool. Move on. At that point, you just got to be able to let it go. And I've had to deal with some haters with the show, which is interesting because the show is all about, being better and trying to gain stuff and so on and so forth. But it is it's one of those things you gotta try to hey man, this isn't what I'm about. You don't want to listen? Cool. Peace. Have a good life. And really then it's just about being the example, like doing the things. And I think, as you guys said, as Sean said earlier, with the internet not having any boundaries, that is the key piece, is that the people that want to scream at the clouds,
Yeah.
they're going to scream at the clouds regardless. I mean, you can walk by them and be like, hey, that's not doing anything. And they'll start screaming at you. And then you can be like, okay, cool, man, go back to the clouds. I'm going to go do the work. And I think that's the key, at least from what I can tell. And from your guys' backgrounds, that is the essence of everything, putting in the work. If you do the work, you show up every day and you're good to go, you're good to go. You don't need a discussion about it. You don't need to talk about how I'm the king of all divorcees, right? Like, no one cares.
Yep.
Show up and do the work. And to that point, I got I had a comment here from the Completely Unreasonable Tour. He says, to be an example to some and to be an example to others and make examples of others. And I think this is a good point in the fact of you want to be an example, great, be an example. But also learn from other examples, and at the same time, hold people accountable when they need to be held accountable. But don't die on the hill, right? Like, this is, at least from my point of view on this, Sash jumped in here and said, come on, Sean, be a man.
Yeah.
But at least in my mind, the key to this is being able to, as you said earlier, being able to say no so that you can say yes to yourself. Because if you just stand up to every single person who's screaming into the clouds and try to set them straight and set them right, you're going to be empty in 5 minutes. Like, they're going to bleed you dry. And so there's a point where you have to just say, have fun over there. I'm going to get back to work. And that's, I think, the key. What do you think? Andrew, I'm going to come back to you. What do you think?
I would say right there is most people live quiet lives of desperation, right? So sometimes we lash out and we do certain things to justify and validate the inaction that we have. So as much as we're here trying to be positive, we got to realize that positivity and that growth and that development puts a target on our back, because a lot of people love the idea of growing and developing. But when they see how much work goes into it and they see how hard it is, that's where the real challenge comes into play. That's where the real grit is, because in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, most people on social media are selling shortcuts. Nothing in my life that I've ever gotten that was valuable to me or that I've actually cared about came off of a shortcut. It came off of me giving everything I had, hitting that boundary, and then learning that I had a little bit more in me to give, or that I reached my absolute threshold. And like Sean said, I needed to start playing with my dials. But at the end of the day, it all came down to what I was doing in that situation, how I handled that situation, and what I did with it. So when I see those shortcuts, I get frustrated with them, because I know it's a pipe dream and I know it's a cash grab, because this is not a destination. We get there, I listen to Drew, and Sean, and we're good now. This is a every day until you're dead thing. And that's just what it is. If you want the life that you really want, that you say you want, you got to put in the work. And even with divorce, if this guy's and sorry to go back to this, but if there's such a divorce guru out there, why are there people who've been divorced 3, 4, 5, 6 times?
That is 100% it. Sean, you got any thoughts on this?
I couldn't agree more on the shortcut aspect of how frustrating it is to see. I mean, before the advent of the internet, people were selling shortcuts, but it hadn't proliferated quite as much. So, going back into the 1800s as an example, the whoever it is that's making horseshoes, they weren't signing up for the course called Fastest Way to Make Horseshoes. What they were signing up for was, at about the age of 10, you went under someone's wing as the trade of horseshoe dude. And now that's what you're doing for the rest of your life, perhaps, unless you've got other aspirations. But in the 1800s, aspirations weren't quite as readily available as they are now. Because on the internet, as an example, you can see the heroic character standing in front of the Lamborghini with all the watches, and you want to be it. You want to shortcut your way to the Lambo by the end of the weekend. And guess what? There's a course for it. But in the 1800s, there was no course, there were no big aspirations. You simply grabbed a hammer and looked at the anvil and you started banging for the rest of your life. And so to me, that's the most honorable approach to life is day after day, as Andrew said. One of his superpowers is perhaps his consistency. I've named it stubbornness for myself.
Yep.
That's one of my
Same.
greatest superpowers is my stubbornness. And if in the 1800s someone handed me a hammer and said, "Make horseshoes, pal," I'd be trying to make the best horseshoes in the world, or at least in my state. And so, if I died on my deathbed with a hammer in my hand and the world's best horseshoe, well, frickin' rock on. That's a
Mhm.
good life, man. Knowing why you're there, focusing on the thing that you're there for, and making it world class, making it best in class. You being the best version of yourself. And by the way, we aren't always able to choose what we are going to be. In the 1800s, when someone hands you a hammer and says, "Guess what? You're now going to go and make horseshoes for the rest of your life." You don't get to say no in the 1800s, but today you get to say no because you're in between games of Call of Duty. And so focusing on what's important, the task in front of you, the life that you want is a decades long journey. There are no shortcuts to the thing that will make you happy on your deathbed. The only thing that's going to make you happy on your deathbed is knowing that you pushed the pace as hard as you could to become the thing that you never got to be, because it's impossible to achieve the thing that you want if you make it big enough.
Mhm.
If you want to be the world's best, you may never be it, but at least the pursuit is honorable, in my opinion. The shortcut is the polar opposite. Grabbing shortcuts in my world, in my worldview anyway, is, I don't want to say it's treasonous because that's a strong word, but it is wrong to the degree where you are betraying yourself. We
Mhm.
all know that the only way to be happy with things in life is to earn them the hard way, the long way, the grind way. If someone slides it to you on a silver platter by the end of the weekend and it has a world champion title on it for whatever reason, you didn't earn it. You know that it's a bit of a betrayal to yourself. And
Mhm.
so, how do you live with that? I'm not sure. I know I couldn't.
I got asked this really great question. I'm for the life of me, I cannot remember who asked it to me, but they said, if you had everything you wanted right now, then what would you do? And really had to stop and think about it. I was like, this got asked to me back when I was in my 20s, and I, I don't, I don't know,
Mhm.
because I hadn't thought beyond those things, right? I only thought about the things themselves, like, oh yeah, I'd love to have this big truck, and I want to work on a ranch and have horses and all these blah, 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 all these things, right? But then what? You still got to wake up in the morning. You still got to feed the horses. You're still gonna have to put gas in the truck. You're still gonna have to do made it. Like, all of these things require that people want to acquire. They require work,
Mhm.
daily work, just to maintain, let alone to achieve. And completely unreasonable tour put this on here. He said a lot of people ask what's the best way, but what they really mean is what's the fastest way. And I think this is a key point to what we're talking about in terms of, setting boundaries for yourself, setting boundaries for your achievements, setting boundaries on how to do these things. Is that, as you said earlier, Andrew, time is not the issue, right? It's not about speed. It's not
Mhm.
about getting it tomorrow. It's just about seeking it. And
Mhm.
I think that's the ultimate boundary to put on yourself, is to say that time is not an issue, or that time is not a boundary for me. I don't need to have it in the next 6 minutes. I don't need
Yep.
to have it in the next 6 years. I don't even need to have it in the next 60 years. I just need to continually seek it.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, do you think that has a lot, that setting that boundary is what gives you the ability to be stubborn or to be consistent, or et cetera, et cetera? What do you guys think? Andrew, coming to you. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it sets the realistic expectation. I think that just going off of the whole getting it easy or quick, for me in my world, I look at that as it's a character flaw, because the ability to dig in deep, whether it's as an individual or a team, may not necessarily be there, right? If we're looking for those shortcomings, short areas. And I'm also a firm believer, kind of going off of that statement there, about some people need to be, examples. We need to view certain people as examples. We need to be an example, right? But my mission, like I said, very specifically, is to put certain things out there, and what you decide to do with them is up to you, because the people who see the value in it, who understand the language, will come to it. And Sean, I'm going to say something here that you're going to know exactly what I mean, even with the whole time construct. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. First time I ever stepped into a shoot house, a kill house doing CQB. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Figure it out, because you're all ramped up and your adrenaline's up and it's crazy, and you can get sucked right into a room. And next thing you know, you go into something with the best of intentions, and it can get really bad really quick. So the way you get efficient is you move slow and smooth. And then when you're smooth and slow, it speeds up naturally. Right. And a good terminology, because you guys are both martial artists, and I'll use this with jujitsu, because I had a very good friend of mine who just received his black belt. The 10 years are going to go regardless. You're either going to show up or you're not. But in that same date, 10 years ago, you're either going to be presented with your hard work, or you're going to be presented with excuses as to why you didn't get there. And at the end of the day, you're either going to justify those things to yourself, or it's going to be a catalyst for you to make the necessary change. Right? Because you can put this out there, I can put this out there, everyone can put it out there. But at the end of the day, when this call is over, you have to do the work. You have to seek the discomfort. You have to seek out the like-minded people to help you get there. And if you don't know how to do it, you have to learn how to ask. And then, like I said, part of that is saying no, because I'm sure, like you guys, I have a lot of people who are fighting for my attention in a lot of different ways. And I don't say that in like, oh, look at me, but I have a lot of titles. Right. I'm a coach. I'm a coach on a base. I run a business. I'm a husband. I'm a family member. I'm a mentor. I do youth work. I do all of these things. So for me, time is my most precious resource. So if I can't find some people who are aligned with that vision and that mission, even if it's a mentality, I can love you, but I can't have you around me right now, because you are taking away from the boundaries that are needed to create what needs to be created. Because at the end of the day, I'm going to have to answer for the way that I live this life. And I don't want to get up there in heaven, because that's where I believe I'm going, and being introduced to the person I could have been compared to the person that I was. So I'm shooting to be the person that I'm being called to be, and finding those people who are also doing the same thing. And then my prayer is that those who aren't ready to receive the message, at least I can plant a seed, and then someone else can water that seed. So that way, when they're ready, we'll be ready to take them on board, and they'll understand what's going on and what is expected of them, because that's also part of holding a boundary. If you work with me, there is an expectation. If you are in my circle, there is an expectation. Just like for me to accomplish certain things in my life, there was an expectation put on me, and I either had to rise to the occasion or not. And that didn't mean I was a good or bad person. It's just you might not have cut it. Right. And in those situations, I was faced with a choice, and we're all faced with that choice. It's just, what do you do with it? Right.
Mm.
And I like my time. My time, for me, my success doesn't come from money or a car or this. It comes with the freedom to put my time where I see that it can be used with the biggest impact.
Mm. I really like the correlation between personal value and accomplishment, in the fact that they are not related to one another at all.
Mhm.
Yet for some reason we really attached that to ourselves very early on in life. Do you guys know why that happens, or have you observed anything that as to why we, I guess, maybe perhaps just Western society, that we attach those things together? Sean, I'm going to come to you first on this one. What do you think?
Can we come back? Can you ask that in about 10 minutes or something
Yes,
like that? Because I
absolutely.
do have some, yeah, it's almost like a separate thought for me that and I'm already wanting to address some of the things that Andrew dropped down there with the
Yeah,
fiery heat. I
hit it.
loved it. It was the idea of slow is smooth, smooth is fast, which is should be carved in stone in every freaking country. And to tie that to the idea of shortcuts, some people have to be really careful with this aspect. They can start pursuing shortcuts and fall into a pattern of shortcutting to such a degree that they're looking for shortcuts for their shortcuts. And so they've lost the sight of slow is smooth, smooth is fast to such a degree where it's fast is fast and shorter is faster. And so they're pursuing the polar opposite of slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And because they've got into this battle rhythm of constantly looking for the shortest of shortcuts to get the furthest down the pipeline, it creates a life that is hinged on half-assing life. If you just keep, to me, the real magic in life is the path that wends and winds its way through the forest. If you're following the path that you aren't in control of, it helps you see things that you'd never see. It helps you see trees that you never would have seen. It helps you stand on rocks that you never would have stood on as you wend and wind your way on a path that isn't in your control. Now, if you decide to shoot a compass bearing and you walk on that straight line, irrespective of the path, you're going to get to where you need to get faster. And what that's going to preclude you from seeing is that magnificent mountain view. If you would have just followed the path that you're not in control of, or seen that nest of birds and their eggs, or whatever the case is, the magic of the world around you that you will miss if you're shortcutting the world. The world is to be, it's like a freaking grand experiment that we're all in. And it's so rich what it can afford us, what it can give us. But you'll miss all of the richness. The tapestry of life will disappear for you if all you're seeking is a single thread instead of the rich carpet, the rich tapestry that you're on. The thread is going to get you there in the linear fashion, going to get you to the end of the carpet, as it were, as fast as possible. But you've missed the rest of the carpet, man. The freaking magic carpet ride is what you're missing. And to me, the adventure of life is not knowing where the trail will take me, but while I'm on the trail, enjoying the fullness of the journey.
This is a beautiful point. And I love, I use slow, smooth, smooth is fast quite a bit when I'm teaching jujitsu, because when you're brand new and people are freaking out and they're just like, everything is just super tense. And I'm like, everything needs to slow down. Everything needs to calm down. And the point I love about this is the fact that if we don't take the time, we'll never have the time, right?
Mhm.
And people always say this, and you're like, I just don't have the time. Well, you do, because other people have the time. And I have a great example of this is that when I go hunting, I'm in very hilly terrain, right? I'm down in southern Alberta in the foothills. You're up and down and up and down and up and down. And I could spend, 10 minutes slogging straight up a hill to get to the top to hopefully get a shot on an animal just at a certain point in time, because I was either late or I slept in or whatever. But I'm going to be exhausted. I'm not going to be shooting straight because my hands are going to be shaking just from the sheer adrenaline dump of getting up there, versus, waking up early, slowly meandering my way up to the top of the hill, getting into position so that I'm nice and calm and relaxed and I can take a clean shot and be able to harvest an animal. But the key in that is that I have to, in the moment of the stress, in that, like, oh my God, I need to get this done right now, slow down.
Mhm.
Process what needs to happen. Do I absolutely have to get this shot? Not particularly, not usually, to say the least. Now, in the military or in special operations like what you guys were doing, there are times where you have to sprint up that hill. There are times where that has to happen. But they're few and far between, if what I understand is correct, Sean. No?
I don't know. Like, maybe tactically they're far and few between, but in preparation, you're freaking doing some sprintings.
Oh,
You're
for
doing
sure.
some mountainings. You're doing some, wow, this is a bit much things.
Mhm.
And so that's what life is supposed to be about. When you were describing, going straight up and I'm trying to take my shot and I'm a little out of breath, all I was thinking of, well, that's totally normal. And I would love that
Yeah.
because all of that stuff has been offloaded over the years. Like I don't feel the
Right.
stress of working hard. The angle doesn't matter to me. What does matter to me is that I'm moving tactically undercover, invisibly, as fast as I can to make that shot. And
Mm.
so if I've got to make the shot is going to be made. And it doesn't matter how little time I've got. I've been there lots of times.
Mhm.
I understand what it feels like because I've just done it so much. And I think that is an important aspect of the shortcut idea. If the shortcut is straight up the hill because you're out of time versus working your way up through creeks and gullies and all of that good stuff because you've got lots of time, you've got to do both to
Mm.
Yeah.
understand which one you need to use in the moment. And it's not like, oh, I walked through a creek once and I walked straight up a hill once. Now I know what they feel like
Mhm.
independently. You've got to do it 1,000 times in order to understand how to do both well, rather than, oh, I've got to make a choice of which one I do poorly. And I do both poorly. If
Mm.
you go up the hill 1,000 times, you do it well. You wind your way 1,000 times, you do it well. Now the choice doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter because you do both well. That's just my thought.
That's a great point. Andrew, you got thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that kind of, just to summarize a little bit of what you're saying, is that allows us to create the spectrum of parameter for us, right? If I know that this is me going through gulches, ravines, and everything else and taking my time, and this is me dead sprinting up out of breath to take my shot, the reality is I know I can do both, but the truth of the matter is probably going to lie somewhere in the middle. So if these are my opposite ends of my boundaries and my extreme, here's my baseline. So then that way, regardless of which direction I need to go, I can get there. Right. But I understand the parameters. So I'm not all the way on one end and all the way on the other and constantly shooting between the two. But if I can set those parameters and learn how to operate really well between them, that means I'm going to do everything well in between all of that stuff too.
Yeah,
So I love it.
that is a fantastic point. The reason I kind of steered us in this direction, I think a little bit, is the fact that it's about maintaining, I guess, not so much maintaining the boundaries, but being able to challenge said boundaries consistently enough that, like you said, anything in between those boundaries is going to be pretty simple. And I think we see that when you look at somebody with a high degree of skill in anything. When I see you working the chains on your deadlifts, you don't do that to someone who's brand new lifting, right?
Right.
It just doesn't make sense because they don't have the skill level to be able to
Mhm.
maintain that. You're not going to put someone who's just brand new to the army into a shoot house and be like, have fun with the operators, see what happens,
Yeah.
right?
There you
No,
go.
that's never going to happen, right? It's time tested, and you gotta. I guess you have to challenge your own personal boundaries pretty
Mhm.
regularly in order to be able to apply those boundaries to other people, at least
Yeah.
in my mind. Um, Now, I had another couple comments here.
So
They're on the
let me
Instagram
just tie
account.
that
What do
to,
you got?
if you don't mind tying something together that you just said, Chance, which
Sure.
is important. You know, you don't typically take a noob and throw them into the kill house and say good luck with the operators. That's not common, but it is a thing. But the noob doesn't go in the kill house. What they do is go up on the catwalk and they look down into the kill house and watch operators do their thing. And then you can look at the noob on the catwalk and say, do you see what's happening here? That's what I expect from you in the future. It's the equivalent of me standing on a log trying to balance on one leg. Someone rides by on their bike and looks over their shoulder. It's the look over the shoulder moment that everyone needs.
Mhm.
Except this is a catwalk moment and they're looking over their shoulder, seeing what's possible in the moment.
Mhm.
A new experience for them, a novel realization that humans can do this. And I mean, unless anyone's stood on a catwalk and watched operators move, you wouldn't believe it
Yeah.
until you see it. But once you see it, You can't unsee it. But what do you do with the unseeable moment? That's for you to decide. You can either do this, shrug your shoulders and say, wow, those guys are freaks. Anyway, what's for lunch? Or you can look at the moment and think, I didn't even realize that was possible. I want me some of that. I got to figure out how I get there. How do I get close to that? How do I get 50% of that? How do I get 12% of that?
Mhm.
Everyone's a bit different in those moments. Some people will deny that it just happened. That's how they will cope with these moments. They just will refuse to accept that that was a thing. Whereas some are compelled to recreate it in their own life. Using those two boundaries of denial and want it really bad, somewhere in between the two, the middle ground, as it were, is generally where most people operate.
Mhm.
So making someone aware of these abilities within humans should be enough in most cases to at least make them think, what do I want with this moment? And if they don't get to see the moments, then they never get to ask themselves the question. I think the question is more important than the moment. The question that will hang on within
Mhm.
them for a long time of who am I in what do I want in life? Do I want some of that or don't I want? Is that too hard? Is that too easy? Am I going to pursue or am I going to laze around? These are really important moments that I think don't happen often enough. So, yeah, not everyone gets thrown in the CQB or in the close quarter battle room, but I think everyone should be thrown up on the catwalk to see what's up.
Mhm.
I I could not agree more with that. I think there's a third line there at least, or perhaps it's along with the second line of the people that deny it ever happened, or there's the people that will envision themselves and be like, "Oh, I could do that," and never actually
Mhm.
try. Right? There's the where they will completely throw themselves off to the side on that one. But I'm going to go back to the question I asked earlier. In that, some people will see the operators work and they'll be like, "Man, that is friggin' awesome. I want to achieve that," because they see they attribute they're going to attribute their worth to that achievement, right? And or the people will watch the Olympics and they'll be like, I'm going to make the Olympics, I'm going to make the next Olympics, and they'll will attribute their worth to that achievement without any real boundaries
Mhm.
around it. So I'm wondering, I guess maybe what advice would you have for somebody that is seeking those achievements without the boundary of understanding their own worth to begin
Mm.
with? Andrew?
So I would say before you really start to figure out what it is you want to do, you really should figure out, and you'll learn this through the process, but who you are and what you're about. And part of that comes through being able to push those boundaries. And I would say for me in my younger years, my early 20s, I pushed my boundaries to the point that it got me put into a psychiatric hospital. So I found my limit, but then I was left with the choice of what am I going to do with it? So one of the pictures you shared on this, the picture of me, in uniform and stuff. 3 years after that picture was taken, I tried to take my own life, ended my career in the military, and then 12 years later, here I am on a platform speaking about everything that's happened in between all of it. So I literally have part of my life where I was so performance driven that it almost took my own life. But within that, it made me realize that none of this is mine. This is all mine temporarily, because when I'm gone and my body's ash and I'm no longer here, what will be remembered of me was what I made people feel. So going back
Beautiful.
to what I said earlier, it's all about I'm here to make you feel something. Now, whatever that something is, that's up to you to decide. Right. But I know for me, when my self-worth was in the accolades of being an operator, of trying to impress my parents or this or that, or fill in the blank, because we all got stuff, because we're all humans, and it was never good enough. Everything I accomplished was never good enough, but it was never good enough because the expectation was to impress someone else instead of just being proud of my own accomplishments. Right. So you got to look at what you're doing. What are you doing it for? Because everything I'm doing now, like I said, is to make people feel, but selfishly, I'm making myself feel also, because it's a two-way street by doing all this stuff. It's not one way. Right. But going back in, that's why all those boundaries are so important, because if there's no boundaries, you'll be left with nothing, because the world's only responsibility to you is to take everything from you. It's up to you to push that fight and set those boundaries and say, this is what I stand for. This is what I don't. This is who I am as a man, as a woman, as a whatever you are, right, in this world, whatever the titles are, because we got a million titles out there, and we're all chasing letters at the end of our names and all of these other things. But for what? For what? Is it to walk into a room so you can puff your chest out and pretend to be this person, but deep down you're a hollow shell that's insecure and projecting on everyone else? Or can you be that quiet confidence that we talked about, that walks into a room and elevates others, that has that head turning moment that makes people say, what is it about that person? I want me some of that. Right? That's what it's about, at least for me, because I can only speak from my own life, the own things that have happened within my own life and the experience that I have. And it's my responsibility to share those things, right? But this, like I said, we've talked about a lot of stuff today, so a lot of things that have been shared. I need everyone to know this is coming from my experiences at life. I'm not telling you what to do with your life or how to live your life, but I hope that this conversation is challenging you to do something with it. Even if you're already doing a lot, you can do a little bit more. We always can be, because there's a refinement process. Even when you got it figured out, or you think you do, that's when the next level comes in of refinement. That's when your boundaries will be pushed again, because now you're on a new level. And with new levels come new devils, right? So like Sean said, this never ends. This does not end. You got to learn how to love the process. And part of that is being okay with knowing you're not going to be perfect. You're going to mess up. You're going to fail. And that's part of the process. So you might as well have fun doing it.
Bam. That is a let's just wrap the show up right there. That's a great way to Sean, you got any thoughts on any of that?
I do. You're right. And how best to do that in our modern society with social media now as probably almost the foundation of society to some degree, and which it wasn't in the 1800s, but now we're in different times, and how to encourage others to seek their own boundaries so that they can better understand themselves. So I turned 61 this year, and I mentioned earlier in the podcast the phases of life. I feel now that I'm in my 60s, one of my responsibilities, perhaps, this responsibility is a strong word, but I think it's the right word. One of my responsibilities is to take all of the things that I've learned over the last 60 years and distill them down into some minor wisdom, crystallize it into something that people can gain from. And I've struggled with this idea of passing on wisdom because I didn't think I had much. And I still don't think I have much. And that's my imposter syndrome flaring up. But I'm told that I have some wisdom and I'm supposed to pass it on. And I'm still trying to figure out how to do that. Now, why would people say that I've got some wisdom to pass on? It's because I've pushed my freaking boundaries, man. For 60 odd years, I've been pushing. Until I'm 70, I'll push. Until I'm 80, I'll push. I'll push, push, push against the ragged edges of the boundaries that, we scuff up against and sometimes get a bit hot as we're leaning on them hard to try to break through them. I'm not satisfied with mediocrity. I'm satisfied with Sean rubbing up against the boundary that looks basically like that. As I look off into the distance, I can't see the boundary because it's gone so far to the right flank and so far to the left flank that I can't even imagine what it feels like. But I still seek it and I still bump into it because though I can't see my boundaries, I know how to push in the direction of my boundaries to eventually bump up against them. And I'm not happy just bumping up against them. I'm trying to lean into them hard enough that I'm reshaping the guardrail. So the pace that you push, the boundary discomfort that you're able to absorb, that's generally set by how ferocious you are in pursuing boundaries. If you're approaching resetting boundaries as a part-time hobby that you'll do once a month versus I want to reshape my life boundaries, that's two different approaches to boundaries. One will take a long time. One will take less time to understand where the boundaries are and the importance of seeking them. Earlier in the podcast, Andrew had said that, or loosely described that It's not about how long something takes, and the shortcuts in life are cheap efforts to try to live life. And I agree with that. However, the moment we're born, the frickin' hourglass gets turned over, and we don't know when it's going to end. But a lot of people miss the message that today's the day to do something about the day that you've got, the day that you can count on, the moment that you're alive in right now. Now's the time to do something with it because tomorrow is not guaranteed. And so that's a message that isn't understood by a lot of people, that day after day, you only get that day. So to push into the day is where we're supposed to be learning about ourselves. But the secondary effect is where we're inspiring others. So again, if I hadn't have pushed as hard as I have throughout my life and then get to live to be 60, now's my opportunity to pay it back. Because like along the way of boundary setting, a lot of people helped me out. A lot of people pulled me back from the fiery edge, or a lot of people pushed me through the fiery edge. I've had both pulls and pushes in my life against the boundaries of life. And all of those people that, generally speaking, when I was a young buck, are now long gone. What do I do with that? Do I disrespect them by shortcutting my way through life? They poured their energy into me. So it's almost like treasonous to not respect that and reflect that back out into society. I've said it in one of my recent Instagram feeds, one of my little verbiages, that I think greatness, none of us become great ourselves. What we do is we are around great people. We try to absorb as much of their greatness as we can, even if it's only a tiny piece. And then it's our job to somehow reflect their greatness out into the world. We ain't great. We're an accumulation of great through others. Then our biggest job is to put that out into the world as a reflection of them. And if you're screwing that up, if you're dropping that ball, if you ain't seeing the importance of having other lives matter today, if they're not with us right now, then think about it. Think about what you're supposed to do with all of that energy that got poured into you, how to pour it back out into the world.
That is a beautiful point. I think there's a lot to be said in there just on its own, in the fact that I mean, for me, my biggest turning point actually came from meeting Sean and him pushing me up against my boundaries for quite a while, holding me in the fire for quite a bit, just to push me beyond what I thought I was capable of. But the big one was the fact that understanding that I personally am a facilitator, and that is what I not only do well, but it's something that I really enjoy, is being able to pass information to new people or to pass anything on to the next generation. It's why I'm a big fan of history. It's why I really love being able to take points from somewhere else and applying them to a new perspective. That capability took a while to understand. And I, like Sean said, he's 61. I turn in 42 this year. It is something that I've just realized only the last year and a half, that's kind of who I am. That's where I should be going. Otherwise, I would never have pushed those boundaries ever, up until I got pushed from somebody else.
Pushed against the fiery edges of Sean. And I mean, we all need, not Sean's in our lives, because I wouldn't want one, but we all need a dude. We all need a dude or whatever. We all need something in our lives where it's that individual who just is a handful, man, who like either they inspire you or irritate you. Either way, it moves you. And we all need to be moved from time to time, uncomfortably moved out of our kind of static existence, taking you from here and throwing you like a football, and you land wherever you land, and now it's your job to figure it out. And I think the little slowest smooth, smoothest fast nudges, they're super important. But in order to explain to someone the idea of, actually, you don't understand boundaries just yet, and I'm going to introduce you to that idea. it's usually with a blowtorch, it's usually with a flamethrower. It's usually with enough sting that
Mm.
it kind of wakes someone up to, oh my goodness, I've just never really faced this kind of tempo before, either psychologically, physiologically, or emotionally. And
Mhm.
so I think we shouldn't come into people's lives like a hand grenade, but we should certainly come in with a slow burning fuse attached
Yeah.
to a block of C4 so they can see the consequences of the action.
Yep.
Nothing quite like a little bit of time fuse going off and you're just watching it
Mhm.
burn. But the question I guess I wanted to ask you guys on this note is the fact that there's point in times where you can go slow as smooth, smooth as fast. There's points in time where you kind of got to throw yourself in the fire. But there's also understanding when you are so comfortable leaning into a particular boundary, let's say the physical one, like you've spent, your whole life in the gym, been working that for a really long time, you've refined it to such a degree and you're going to continue to push that line, but that's the only line you're working because you're
Mhm.
comfortable working that line.
Mhm.
How do we, I guess, bridge that gap within ourselves of like,
Mhm.
I've been doing this so long that I'm comfortable pushing this particular boundary. How do I engage the other ones that I've been neglecting?
Mm.
Andrew, any thoughts?
So I use the same premise of sets and reps. So because you use the gym analogy, so like it's pretty obvious that like I'm in a gym, I'm gonna train, I'm gonna take care of that. But I use sets and reps for my reading. I use sets and reps for my writing. I have daily reps I need to get done, just like I have daily exercise from my physicality. I have mental reps that need to be done every day to be firing at my best mentally. I have spiritual reps I need to do so I can make sure that my cup is full, right? I have emotional reps or things that I need to do to make sure that my battery is full too, because kind of like Sean was saying, if that dial is only up on one and the other ones aren't getting that attention, that's where the weakness is going to come into play. And to use a training analogy on that, when we train people out here, or when I train people, 66% of our training is addressing weakness, but they don't realize it because 100% of the time their intention is involved and present directly in the moment. But the way we're able to do that is by attacking weak areas. So you can't get better unless you're attacking weaknesses. If you think you're getting better by only doing the things you're good at, you're lying to yourself, and Murphy's Law will expose you. And that's something that I learned as a young man that I've continued to apply into my life. So yes, the gym is a non-negotiable for me. Training is a non-negotiable, but so is reading, so is writing, so is my prayer life, so is making sure I'm talking about these things. And a lot of that has come with making sure that I have a circle of people around me that I've been able to express my needs, wants, and desires. They understand it, and we have those clear boundaries around. So if I'm not doing the things that I maybe necessarily need to do, they could be like, hey, Drew, what's going on? Something seems off. And having those level of checks and balances in place. Because one thing that, like you said, Sean, is I struggle with imposter syndrome. I do. And one thing I've had to realize with me is I can think of 3 people, Sean, you included in this, who are world class, that have poured into me in areas of their life and things that they've done that they've been world class in, whether it's athletics, whether it's speaking engagements and coaching, or whether it's through the military. So one thing I've had to learn for myself is if I have 3 world class people pouring into me, what does that make me? That makes me world class too, whether I want to realize it or not, or it can continue to make me, I'm not good enough. Oh, I'm going to get this. Oh, I'm going to get that. And going back to the mind, this is always going to play tricks on us. This is always going to tell us that we're not good enough or that we can do it. And we're either going to believe it or we're not. Right. So for me, physicality was never my weak link, but my weak link was my emotional thought process. So for me, if I'm trying to get better, I need to put more intention into the things that make me more emotionally stable and sound across the board, which for me, that's that reading, the writing, tapping into the art side of the house, because all I've ever known is physicality. Right. But if I live by the sword, I'm going to die by the sword. So I have to pick up the pen as well.
I love that. Sean, any thoughts on this?
I wish I would have understood life to the degree that you just laid it out, Andrew, when I was your age, because I didn't understand it quite as clearly as you do at your age. And I wish I would have, but it's taken me longer to learn the things that you've already learned. And much like yourself, I'm a guy who I've got a bit of a routine. In fact, this morning I already checked off the boxes on in my Instagram stories. I was working through 2 different books. One is a book about ninjutsu. It's quite a large book, and the other one was Sun Tzu's illustrated book that my son just purchased for me a couple days ago. And so I've read Sun Tzu a bunch of times. In fact, I directly quoted Sun Tzu on my Army sniper course back in like the 80s. And so I think that routines are a good example of what we're about as a human. If you don't have the kind of routines where you wake up in the morning and you just dedicate yourself to, even if it's 5 minutes of reading, contemplation about the reading. I try to, again, the 2 books that I read this morning, I try to highlight some of them and I put them up into my Instagram stories, because that somehow makes me feel that in order to highlight something of importance, I've had to have given it more than just casual thought. And so by employing deeper thought into my reading and highlighting things and then putting up into my Instagram stories, I have to be doubly careful to understand that I'm not just serving myself in the moment, I'm serving people who track what I do. And so it makes me really responsible, not just to myself, but to those around me. It's just taking that rotary dial from 7 and turning it up to a 9 of responsibility to me and to them. And so Andrew had said that when he was younger, he was pushing so hard that he got himself into a situation where he really struggled with the world around him. And don't have to get into the details of that, because that's a age-old tale of many people who've just pushed so hard against one of the trajectories, psychological, physiological, emotional, that the other 2 suffer to a degree where it is now notable. But in Andrew's case, he took it to notable plus plus. And so, as far as I'm concerned, from where I'm at, that lesson can never be forgotten by him. I mean, he knows the importance of balancing the sliders better than I do. And so it's now his job to translate that out to the world, to impart the lesson that he learned so hard, to take some of that hardness off for someone else, but not to a degree where they get a shortcut lesson. So if you've lived a hard life, if you've learned hard lessons, I believe that our job is to get people close to understanding what we've gone through their own journey, but not to the degree where they're breaking like we broke from time to time. And so that modulation, that bandwidth that we give out to someone for them to maybe understand what their boundaries are, it's kind of a responsibility that you can't just callously or casually push. So when Chance and I first got together, it wasn't like I just put a blinder on and said, I'm just going to put the lock around this guy. I didn't. I was intelligent about what I did. And I had purpose-driven reasons for doing what I did. I had a vision of how Chance was going to take this tiny little podcast that was just a twinkle in our eye way back in the day and become freaking magnificent. And to become magnificent, there's cost, there's fire. Your arse is on fire and you're trying to beat it out every day. So I think that greatness requires pressure, and the amount of pressure is the amount of time that you've got. And we've all got limited time. So earlier on, we'd said that time really isn't that important. You know, you just do, but time is important, depending on how much you want to accomplish in life, and not just for ourselves, but for those around us. And so time is our greatest resource that we have to control wisely. Understand that we're all in control of the throttle, but the throttle can't always go to 10. And so what we do with that on the daily is for us to figure out, but you'll never figure it out unless you start playing with the throttle, you start playing with the boundaries, you start playing with the ideas in your head of the future vision that you've got, put it all together and work the experiment, work the puzzle until you start getting outcomes, good or bad, and then recalibrate off of those. But none of that'll happen unless you see the importance of velocity, pressure, boundaries.
I love where this is going. Andrew, you got any thoughts on that? I saw you taking notes.
Yeah, no, I had to write something down real quick because going off of the premise of time, I want to hammer that with you too, because there is time does matter, right? So the way I want to reframe what we said about time is you should have urgency with your time, but you should not be sloppy with your time, right? I move with urgency. I know that my time is limited on this earth, but I don't allow that realization to make me sloppy with where my time goes. If anything, it makes me have to be a little bit more self-aware of where my time is going because of how limited it is. But because of that, that doesn't make me rush for those shortcuts like Sean was talking about, because chances are if we start taking shortcuts, we're always going to look for them. And there's going to be more work to be done on the back end because the foundation was never set.
Yeah, the challenge, I see this pretty regularly with my with my sons, in that, you know, when they want to do homework and they're always looking for it. Well, how do I just want to, I don't want this to take all night. And I'm like, yeah, neither do I. So let's just do the work, right? I don't want to sit here all night with you either, but
Yeah.
like, not that I don't want to be with them, but like, I don't want to sit here and doing grade 4 math again. I already did grade 4 math. Like, let's
Right.
let's move it on. But the point being is that, you know, if you do it correctly, and I actually got a rash guard that says this, it's easier if you do it right. And in the long term, it is easier if you do it right. If you take the time now to build your foundation. And I mean, I've used this example before in terms of engineering or construction, or, you know, when we're laying bridges or anything like that, the foundation is key. Then it becomes easier from there. If you don't lay that foundation correctly, whether with that, you know, boundaries and time and understanding yourself and your capacities and all these other things, if you don't understand those, anything you build on that will be collapsible in a heartbeat. And to your point, Andrew, and from my own experience as well, when you just push with no foundation, the moment that, you know, a little shake happens, the whole tower comes down.
Yeah.
From wherever you are. And it leads you into this hole of just like, well, I just built all this stuff and now it's in the trash and it's completely all over the place and you don't know where to go from there. And it feels like the only answer, at least for me, feels like the only answer was to disappear.
Yeah.
And the challenge is that you don't actually disappear. You just stop being there. But your all the issues and all of the difficulties and all of the things that you had built up around you, those still come to the forefront. It just places it on other people's shoulders.
Yeah.
Versus dealing with it yourself. And I think that is a key point to this in terms of the boundaries, in terms of boundary conversation, is that it starts with a solid foundation. And that foundation usually gets figured out the hard way a couple times. You got to build a couple towers, let them fall down, figure out, oh man, maybe I should lay this concrete a little bit better. I think that's a key point, at least in my mind. What do you guys think? Andrew, come back to you.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, because I thought I was tough until I learned what toughness was. And I had to start talking about how I felt and how I feel and crying and doing these things that broke my stereotype of what toughness was. But in the reality of it was that showed me true strength, and true toughness lies in transparency, because once I was transparent with what I was dealing with, it didn't have ownership over me anymore. Right. And that's a hard one. That's a hard one to go into. But like I said, choose your hard. Everything we've been talking about today is hard. Choose your hard. Of course, that was hard for me. But you know what else was hard? Walking around with a false sense of bravado. Like I had everything all together, because I was afraid that if I showed anything else, then I would be exposed. That was hard too. So choose your hard, you know?
I love that. Love it. Sean, you got any thoughts on this?
I do. I totally agree with what Andrew just said. We could end the show there. I think that you know, Chance, you not use the example, but the kind of case that you presented, which is just a proxy for every man. I think at times, whether we're young or old, it happens to all of us, I believe. And it doesn't mean that it's a one and done either. I might be victim to it myself in the future if I don't keep a situational awareness, or I don't observe my blind spots. And it's that classic case of, you put yourself into something, you engage in something, you're trying to accomplish something, and it falls apart like a house of cards all around you. In that moment, we all get to decide whether we live in that house of cards for the rest of our lives in our head, or whether we just frickin' move on and smash something else with a proper foundation and keep on crushing. And the towers that fall around us, the house of cards that fall around us, every time that occurs, we either get to live in that house of cards for the rest of our lives, or we just frickin' do one of these, right, what's next? And re-engage. And don't sweat the details of how bad you botched it in your house of cards. I think, myself included, a lot of, I want to say a lot of dudes, but maybe it's the entire planet. Most of my life is around dudes where I've observed this. A lot of dudes screw it up and then can never forgive themselves. And I've been that way myself in the past. It's the moment that I say, man, I can't change that. I was trying my best. I'll try and do better in the future. I'll try to do it in a different way. I'll try to get a different outcome. But I know that I kind of botched that one, but I've got to punch forward. I can't make it right, so I'll make it right in the future by punching forward. And so if I'm doing my best, if I apologize for the moment, punch forward into the future, and whether I have a successful outcome or not is neither here nor there. The key factor is that I don't dwell in the carnage that I left behind me. I don't dwell on the house of cards that I could live in for the rest of my life unless I just simply say to myself, forward always. And so, Chance, if you would have kind of grasped that when you were younger, maybe 10 years ago or whatever the case is, realized that you were living in your squalid house of cards and so comfortable that you liked your own smell. If you could have just got right with the program and said, screw that, man. I'm out of here. I'm Chance Burles 2.0. I forgive myself and let's go frickin' smash. Your life would look different. But it can look different in a millisecond today. Every guy or any person, every guy or girl that's listening to this later, if you've screwed a whole bunch of things up to include up to about 5 minutes ago, if you just totally botched it, all right. Forgive yourself, do better, but you've got to punch forward into the future, not live in your house of cards.
This is a really great point in terms of looking over your shoulder, actually, kind of back to the guy, the divorce expert, the man that was you were talking about earlier, in that person is still looking over their shoulder on that mistake, right? They're living in that mistake. And to your point, Sean, you're 100% right. I was living in my house of cards, enjoying my own scent. It was amazing. But it took a point. It took one day where I said, no more. And I started getting to work. And then it took another point where one day I said, okay, now I need to work harder. And then it took another day where I said, okay, now I need to work harder. And to your point, Sean, earlier, it is good to have somebody in your life that'll poke you and prod you and push you and throw you off the cliff and do all those good things. But it's still up to you to figure out how to fly, still figure out how to land. It's still up to you to figure out where to go from there. Oh, my legs are broken. Okay, now what? Right? You can sit and live in it, or you can get working and go from there. And that's the only thing that I've taken. Well, I can't say the only thing. The biggest thing that I've taken from the collective is that every day is day one. Every day. So get to work and then carry on. Andrew, you got any other thoughts on this?
The only thing I'd like to say about this is you don't have to have it all figured out, but you do have to show up.
Yes. Love that. So we're at about an hour 40. I think we've reached a nice kind of closing period here. We've talked quite a bit about all these things. I have a couple comments I want to touch on and get your thoughts on before we jump into this, before we finish off for the day. got this a little bit earlier. Matt Walker, watching you guys from Bradford, Ontario. Thank you guys for your service. Absolutely. We're always happy. They paid us to blow things up. Like, that's just a good day. And then I got a couple of these from Instagram. I had to pull them off to the side while you guys were chatting here. Dave Curvin jumped in. He said, I think it comes down to the individual's why for what they're trying to pursue. What are they trying to gain from achieving something? Why? And what will they do with it once they achieve it? People need to have other people in their life, not only pushing boundaries themselves, but pushing the boundaries of others around them until it becomes a contagious cycle, in my opinion. Any thoughts on that, Andrew? I'll put you up first.
Yeah, strong why will get you through the hardest times in your life. So if you can always bring it back to why you're doing anything, you can pretty much get through everything. So I agree with that statement. And I would just say once that mindset gets you to the top of one hill, just realize that one peak exposes several others. Right. And you just keep that same mentality and you just continue your why will change throughout the seasons of your life. But when you can constantly bring it back to your why, that's your compass. That's your North Star. That's your compass. That's your bearing, whatever terminology you want to use for that. But that why is the thing that will get you through. Right. And just like we're saying with those boundaries, be prepared to allow some flexibility within the framework of what that why looks like for you, because life is not linear. It's very dynamic.
That it is. Sean, you got any thoughts on this?
I've said it a number of times, and I can't think of a simpler way to say it, so I'll just say it the same way again. I think it's a simple equation. Why are you here? Once you understand your why, how are you going to get to where you need to go? And then it's velocity and timeline. How fast do you want to move to shorten down the timeline of where you want to get? If you want to take a long time to get there, well, dial back your velocity. If you want to get there faster, pick up your velocity. But understand that velocity ain't free. Velocity ain't 100%, 100%, 100%. Velocity has to be contextualized against those three levers that you're controlling: psychological, physiological, and emotional. And you only get 100% to play with. So if your idea of going maximum effort is to go 90% physical, now what? Where's your balance, bro? So why, how, velocity, and timeline. The rest is up to you. And that is the devil's in the details. The rest is up to you. You can get the best coach in the world who'll sit next to you for the rest of your life and ask them to coach you through life. They will not make these sort of decisions for you. They will not tell you what your why is. They will not tell you how hard and fast you have to work in these moments. They will describe a general path forward for you. They can create sets and reps for you, but they can't own the path for you. You have to show up wanting the path that they'll help shape for you, and then you have to do the work, not them. Life is a solo journey surrounded by other solo journeyists. You have to figure out your solo path while working with other people on their solo paths, so it becomes a communal effort. And that's a hard thing to balance. If it's hard to just balance yourself, it's harder to balance in a community. So find like-minded individuals where there isn't quite as much dissonance within the group that you're journeying with. Find like-minded trajectories so that as you're winding and wending your way through life, there's perhaps less deep gullies and less Mount Everest that you have to scale as you're moving through it. Like-minded individuals doesn't mean echo chamber. It just means people who are cool, who push hard, who want more, who've been in the game long enough that they know the game, but don't know the game so well that they've lost their sense of curiosity. Life is really complex or really simple. That's for you to figure out which one you're operating in. But from my perspective, as long as I'm around cool people who are pushing hard, the rest just kind of takes care of itself.
Yeah. I would say, and one of the greatest way to experience that is go do jujitsu. And it'll teach you all kinds of things, and it requires that you stay I just lost the word, but it requires that you constantly think and constantly want to learn more. I really just want to say thank you guys. This has been a fantastic conversation. We kind of started on boundaries and we've been on kind of all over the place, but I think it all plays into boundaries in and of itself. So I really thought we hit the nail on this one. Any final thoughts? Anything at all still bubble in the back of your brain before we shut her down for the afternoon, Andrew?
Just realize it's whoever's listening to us right now. It's your life. It's your canvas. So go create your art.
Bam. I like it. Sean, any final thoughts?
And that's a nice little segue that I hadn't considered. In speaking of art, Miyamoto Musashi, as he was growing up as a young man, was all about the sword, all about the battle, all about the duels, all about the win. And then when he entered into his later phase of his life, he turned into an artist, the artist's way. He started calligraphy. He started writing in a cave, wrote things that we still read to this day. And so when he was writing in that cave, I often wonder if he realized the impact he would have on the world as he was working on his calligraphy and as he was working on his thoughts. And I wonder if he would have tried harder to do better if he would have understood the impact that he has had on the world, or whether he would have ever started if he would have considered how many people would have thought about his thoughts. That's what I think about. Not just the impact that we all leave in life as we leave life. I don't think we should just casually try to impact all those around us just because. I think that we're supposed to impact because we're supposed to, not just because. And so the impact that we're supposed to make comes after a long, long period of time. A lot of mistakes, a lot of experiences, a lot of broad expansion of thought. So Masashi managed to impact the world because of his understanding that the phases of life are supposed to teach us things, and towards the end of life, we're supposed to reinvest and reteach the lessons that we've learned. That's my final thoughts. Being a artist, being a individual who is using the artist's way to pass on the way.
The only thing I have to add to that is the fact that I think those that seek legacy are the ones that are less likely to to have a legacy, if that makes sense. And those that just seek the best of themselves are usually the ones that leave legacy. So if you seek to be your best self at all times, as it says on our mugs, do your best. If you seek to be that person, the legacy is already secured.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind. So as we all continue to learn, build, and grow, we'll see y'all next week. Chimo.